Shania Twain is standing center stage beneath 10,000 lights. The crowd is screaming. She's wearing a midriff-bearing ensemble that became one of the most talked about looks in music history. She's smiling like someone who has never known a single dark day. That image is what most people carry in their heads when they think of Shania. But images are carefully constructed things. They're the surface of a lake, beautiful, reflective, completely hiding what lives beneath. Here's what was actually beneath. A child who sang in smoky bars after midnight just to keep her family from going hungry. A teenager who absorbed violence at home the way a sponge absorbs water, relentlessly, silently, with no relief in sight. A young woman who lost both of her parents in a single phone call and then quietly parked her own dreams so she could raise her siblings. A wife who discovered that her closest friend had become her greatest betrayer. A singer who spent 15 years grieving a voice she feared she would never get back. And somehow, through all of it, she kept moving forward. At 60 years old, Shania Twain has begun speaking with a directness that she never allowed herself before. The things she is saying now are not small revelations. They are the kinds of truths that reframe everything you thought you knew about her. Her past is darker than the public understood. Her resilience is more remarkable than any awards ceremony could measure. And her story, the real one, is one of the most extraordinary in the history of popular music. First, we shall get into the betrayal. Shania was 42 years old. She had been married to Mutt Lange for 15 years. She had made some of the most successful music of the 20th century alongside him. She had built a life in Switzerland, on a property overlooking Lake Geneva, in the kind of setting that looks like peace from the outside. Then came the call. It came from an unexpected source. Frédéric Thibault, the husband of Shania's best friend and personal assistant, Marie-Anne Thiebaud, had discovered that his wife was having an affair with Mutt Lange.
Lying to you, saying nothing's going on, and it's her that he's cheating with.
Yeah, betrayal is really a devastating thing. At the end of any marriage is very sad. And she got very defensive and said, how could you think such a thing, that I would ever lie to you about anything? It's the whole innocent friend, even with a tear in her eye.
Now let us go back to where it all started. The city of Windsor, Ontario, sits right at the bottom of Canada, so close to Detroit you can practically see it across the river. That is where Eileen Regina Edwards was born, on August 28, 1965. She came into the world in dramatic fashion, arriving with blue-tinted skin and not making a sound. The doctor who delivered her reportedly believed, for a terrifying moment, that the baby had not survived. She had. Barely, but she had. It was a foreshadowing that nobody recognized at the time. When Eileen was just 2 years old, her parents' marriage ended. Her mother Sharon gathered her daughters and set out to build something from very little. She eventually found love again with a man named Jerry Twain, a member of the Ojibwa First Nation from the Matagami community nearby. Jerry adopted the girls, gave them his surname, and relocated the family to Timmins, a small mining city in northern Ontario where the winters can drive the temperature down to 30 below zero. The Twain household was not a stable one. Financially, it was a constant scramble. The family moved so frequently, sometimes 3 times within a single year, that keeping track of addresses felt pointless. They moved to outrun unpaid bills, to find cheaper housing, to try again somewhere slightly different. The girls learned early that nothing was permanent. Food was never guaranteed. Some days there wasn't enough. The family hunted moose and caught fish, not as a recreational activity, but as a matter of survival. Meals were sometimes bread and mustard, and nothing else. Eileen would later say that she learned to distract herself from hunger by writing words and playing with sounds. It worked. Partly. But here is where the story shifts in a way that is both heartbreaking and astonishing. Sharon noticed something in her daughter that she couldn't ignore. Even before the child was old enough for school, she was singing. Not just humming along to songs she'd heard, actually singing, with expression and pitch and feeling. Sharon began driving her daughter to talent shows. The drives could be hundreds of miles round trip. They didn't have money for extras, but somehow Sharon always found a way to make those trips happen. By the age of 4, Eileen was picking out melodies on a toy guitar. By 5, she had won her first talent competition, a ribbon and $5 that felt, to a small girl in a cold house, like extraordinary wealth. By 8 years old, she was performing in bars after midnight. Let that land for a moment. An 8-year-old child, in bars, late at night, performing for whatever customers were still lingering after closing time. The bars paid her around $20 per appearance. She hated the environment, the smell of alcohol, the unpredictable behavior of adults who'd had too much to drink. One man grabbed her. Others made her uncomfortable in ways a child shouldn't have to name. She started wearing multiple layers of clothing to make herself appear less visible, less of a target. But she loved the music. So she stayed. Here is one of the little-known details that most people don't know about this era of her life. At age 13, young Eileen was invited to perform on the CBC's Tommy Hunter Show, one of the most respected country music programs in Canadian television. While she was navigating a genuinely dangerous home environment and performing in bars just to help pay bills, she was also appearing on national television. These two realities existed simultaneously, and almost no one connected them. By the time she was 10, she was writing her own songs, not fragments or verses, full songs, with structure and emotion. One of her earliest compositions was about her mother's depression, about how Sharon would sometimes withdraw into herself for days, leaving young Eileen to manage the household and look after her younger siblings. The violence at home was constant. Jerry had a terrible temper. Sharon bore the worst of it. There were nights when the police showed up and nothing changed. There were periods when the family fled to a shelter and then returned. In her 50s, Shania would finally confirm publicly what many had long suspected, that the abuse she experienced in that house went beyond what Jerry did to her mother. She was a victim too, and she carried that in silence for decades. November 1987. Shania, she had not yet legally changed her name, but let's use the name the world would come to know, was 22 years old. She was beginning to build something. She had local recognition. She had real talent. The future, while not clear, at least seemed to have a shape to it. Then the phone rang. Her mother Sharon and her stepfather Jerry had been killed in a head-on collision with a logging truck near a place called Kapuskasing. Both gone. The same two people who had shaped her entire childhood. One with love, one with harm, both undeniably present, were simply no longer in the world. She had 3 younger siblings at home. Mark, Carrie-Ann, and Daryl. The youngest was still a child. Somebody had to step up. There was no debate, no formal family meeting. Shania put her own life on hold and became a guardian. To support them, she accepted a performing position at Deerhurst Resort in Huntsville, Ontario, a large entertainment venue where she sang, danced, and performed in theatrical productions in front of hundreds of guests every night. She stayed for 5 years, not because it was her dream, because it paid the bills, because it kept a roof over her siblings' heads. She said years later that those years at Deerhurst were actually an education in performance that no conservatory could have provided. She learned how to hold a room, how to recover from a missed note, how to connect with an audience that hadn't come specifically to see her. She learned discipline the hard way, by doing it every single night, whether she felt like it or not. But the whole time, through all of it, she was holding something back, something larger, something that didn't fit inside a resort show. When her siblings were finally old enough to manage on their own, Shania packed her things and headed to Nashville. She arrived in 1989. She was 23 years old. She cleaned houses to make rent. She paid for vocal coaching out of a budget that barely existed. She slept in whatever arrangement she could find, and she showed up, day after day, to the kind of city that has consumed more dreams than it has fulfilled. She also did something quietly significant. She changed her first name to Shania. The name has long been described as an Ojibwa word meaning, "I'm on my way." The truth, according to her own biographer, is more complicated. There's genuine linguistic debate about whether the word exists in Ojibwa in quite that form. What isn't in debate is why she chose it. She was moving forward. She was done being the person the past had made her. She was someone new, going somewhere new. She got signed to Mercury Nashville Records. Her first album came out in 1993. It sold modestly, about 100,000 copies, and it didn't sound like her. She had creative control over almost nothing. The one song on that record that she wrote herself was called "God Ain't Gonna Getcha" for that, and even that felt hemmed in by the constraints placed around her. Critics appreciated her voice. Audiences were mildly interested. Nobody was astonished, but somebody was paying attention. Robert John Lang was one of the most successful rock producers alive. His resume included Def Leppard, AC/DC, and a string of albums that had collectively sold hundreds of millions of copies worldwide. He was not a country music figure. He was not expected to become one. He heard Shania's voice on a recording and called her. She later said she thought it was a prank. It wasn't. What developed between them was one of the most creatively potent partnerships in modern music, and also a romance. Within 6 months of their first conversation, they were married in December 1993. The ceremony took place in Huntsville, Ontario, not far from where she had spent 5 years building herself back up after her parents died. He was 45, she was 28. They had known each other less than a year. Together they built The Woman in Me. When it was released on February 7th, 1995, country radio didn't quite know what to do with it. It had pop architecture underneath the country surface. The production was lush, where Nashville liked things sparse. Shania's image, confident, physically expressive, unafraid of her own presence, made some corners of the industry deeply uncomfortable. The audience disagreed with those corners completely. The album sold 12 million copies in the United States. It was certified diamond. It produced hit after hit. Any Man of Mine became her first crossover success. climbing both the country charts and the pop charts simultaneously. Whose Bed Have Your Boots Been Under became a favorite. She swept the Grammy for Best Country Album in 1996 when she was 30 years old. The Nashville establishment pushed back hard. Radio stations circulated memos. Some labeled her music a betrayal of the genre's roots. She received threats. In a Rolling Stone interview in March of 1996, she said her goal was never to abandon country music. It was to carry it somewhere it hadn't been before. She was right. And here is a detail that most accounts of this period overlook. Even while recording that breakthrough album in 1994 and 1995, while fighting to be listed as a co-producer at a time when women in Nashville studios were rarely given that credit, Shania was also quietly showing the first symptoms of Lyme disease. She didn't know what it was yet. Her voice would tire strangely. There were moments of dizziness that she attributed to exhaustion and kept to herself. The disease was already working, silently, against everything she was trying to build. She didn't stop. She just kept going. On November 4th, 1997, Shania Twain released Come On Over. There is a list of things you could call it. The best-selling album in country music history. The best-selling album ever recorded by a female artist in any genre. A record that had sold over 40 million copies worldwide by 2015. A collection of songs that produced 10 top 20 singles. 10 from a single album. An achievement that strains credibility even now. You're Still the One became one of the defining love songs of its era. From this moment on was played at weddings around the world for a decade. Man, I Feel Like a Woman became an anthem that transcended any single genre label. What almost no one knew was the emotional subtext running beneath all of those songs. Shania would reveal years later that some of the most romantic tracks on that album were written while she was already sensing something wrong in her marriage. Not a specific knowledge. She didn't know yet about what would come in 2008, but a quiet feeling, a gap, a coolness that hadn't been there before. She channeled it all into the music, because the music was where she had always put the things she couldn't say out loud. From this moment on, one of the most gorgeous love songs on the album was reportedly written during a soccer match in Italy that Mutt was watching, and Shania had no interest in. Her mind drifted. She started writing. That is a genuinely little-known fact, that one of the most tender songs of the late 1990s was born because its author was bored at a sporting event and let her imagination wander. The Come On Over World Tour ran from May 1998 through December 1999. 165 shows, North America, Europe, Australia, the United Kingdom. Over 2 million fans, $80 million in revenue. In Miami in January 1999, Elton John joined her on stage. The Backstreet Boys performed with her on From This Moment On. Every critic who had questioned whether she could deliver live was forced to revise their assessment. At the 41st Grammy Awards in February 1999, she took home 4 trophies in a single evening: Best Country Song and Best Female Country. Vocal Performance for You're Still the One. The same night that Lauryn Hill was making history with her extraordinary sweep of nominations, Shania was standing at the microphone collecting hardware that represented the scale of her cultural reach. The Academy of Country Music had already named her Entertainer of the Year in 1998. She received a diamond certification for Come On Over, while also receiving the same distinction for The Woman in Me. making her the only artist in history to hold 2 diamond certifications simultaneously at the time. Total album units for Come On Over eventually exceeded 47 million. She was, by any measure, the most commercially successful female artist in country music history, possibly in the genre's entire existence. Behind the numbers, behind the tours, behind the stadium shows and the magazine covers and the Grammys, something was breaking down. In 2003, while horseback riding on property in Switzerland, Shania was bitten by a tick. She didn't think much of it initially. She thought even less of it when the symptoms began, because they were vague and inconsistent. The kind of thing you could easily attribute to stress, to overwork, to the physical demands of touring. The Lyme disease that Tick carried would eventually steal her voice, not all at once, not in a single dramatic moment she could point to. It was a slow erosion. The vocal cords suffered nerve damage. A condition called dysphonia settled in, a disruption of the ability to produce consistent, controlled sound. She would begin to lose her balance on stage. She experienced blackouts that lasted fractions of a second, but happened with a terrifying frequency. She would be standing at the microphone, singing, and something would go dark for just a moment, just long enough to destabilize everything. She began to believe she would never sing again. During her 2003 Up Tour, which ran from September of that year through March 2004, playing 115 shows, earning over $100 million, selling out Madison Square Garden in minutes. She was fighting this privately. There were cortisone injections to get through certain dates. During a November 2003 show in Chicago, her voice cracked audibly on stage. In Munich the following March, a stage accident injured her ankle. She cancelled some dates, but donated $1 million from tour proceeds to children's hospitals. She was already unraveling, and no one outside her closest circle knew it. By 2005, she had largely retreated from public life. She settled into Switzerland with her son Ija, who had been born on August 12, 2001, and whom she described as the center of her existence. She baked birthday cakes. She fed the dogs. She did ordinary things in an extraordinary setting, and tried to keep her child's world stable while her own health quietly deteriorated. The music world waited for her next album. It would take 15 years. Shania was 42 years old. She had been married to Mutt Lange for 15 years. She had made some of the most successful music of the 20th century alongside him. She had built a life in Switzerland, on a property overlooking Lake Geneva, in the kind of setting that looks like peace from the outside. When the call from Frederick came in, telling her that her best friend was having an affair with her husband Mutt, she later described the experience as a violence, not a metaphor, a physical sensation of something fundamental being destroyed. She had lost her parents in an instant phone call in 1987. This felt, she said, exactly like that. The same quality of absolute rupture, the same sense that the ground had been removed from beneath her feet and nothing would ever be solid again. What made it extraordinary, and in some ways what made it survivable, was what happened next. Two people who had each suffered the same betrayal began, carefully and improbably, to find comfort in each other. Shania and Frederick Thibault, both broken by the same deception, became confidants, then friends, then something more. She and Mutt separated in May 2008. Their divorce was finalized on June 9, 2010. On January 1st, 2011, Shania married Frederick Tiebo in a small ceremony in Puerto Rico. There is something almost novelistic about it, the betrayal that destroyed one chapter, creating the conditions for the next one to begin. But before any of that healing could happen, there was a darkness that she would only speak about publicly much later. At 43 years old, living alone with her grief in Switzerland, she reached a point that she described as a complete collapse. She found herself on a balcony, contemplating an end to everything. It was the thought of her 7-year-old son, his face, his need for her, his absolute dependence on her presence in the world, that stopped her. She stepped back inside, and eventually, slowly, she began to rebuild. In May 2011, Shania published her autobiography, which she titled From This Moment On, the same name as one of the most beloved songs from Come On Over, chosen now with a different kind of meaning. She wrote every word herself, without a co-writer or ghostwriter. The book sold over 100,000 copies in its first week and debuted on the New York Times bestseller list. In it, she didn't soften the past. She wrote about poverty in granular, unglamorous detail, about washing clothes in a river, about going to school knowing she'd have nothing to eat, about the particular shame of need in a place where need is treated as a personal failure. She wrote about the violence her stepfather inflicted on their household. She wrote about the abuse she herself experienced, beginning at age 10, which she had carried in silence for over 40 years before this book. She wrote about losing her parents, about the years at Deerhurst, about the marriage and its collapse, and she wrote about forgiveness, not as a gift to Mutt Lange, but as a release of a burden she no longer wanted to carry. She said his mistakes were his to live with. She refused to make them hers. The book was critically celebrated. People who had assumed they knew Shania Twain's story discovered they had only known its most polished surface. What lay beneath was far more complicated, far more painful, and ultimately far more inspiring than the stadium shows had ever suggested. That same year, she appeared in a television series called Why Not? With Shania Twain, which documented her journey back toward her voice and her public self. It was candid in a way that made audiences genuinely uncomfortable, in the best possible sense. Her Las Vegas residency, Shania, Still the One, launched in December 2012 and ran through 2014. 105 shows, $43 million in revenue, every ticket sold. Her voice was not what it had been. She knew that. The audience didn't care, or perhaps more precisely, they cared about what they were witnessing, which wasn't a perfect recreation of 1999. It was a woman who had nearly lost her voice and nearly lost herself, standing on a stage and singing anyway. By 2018, Shania had been living without a reliable voice for roughly 15 years. She had tried every form of vocal therapy. She had rested, worked with specialists, adjusted her technique. Nothing fully restored what the Lyme disease had taken. The nerve damage was too extensive. The dysphonia was not going to heal itself. On August 1st, 2018, she underwent a procedure that almost no one in the general public knew existed. She was fully awake during the surgery. As surgeons worked on her vocal cords, inserting Gore-Tex supports to encourage the cords to function properly again, she was singing, quietly, carefully, giving the surgeons real-time feedback on what was working and what wasn't. She described it later as one of the most terrifying experiences of her life, which is a significant statement from someone who has had no shortage of terrifying experiences. After the surgery, she was afraid to make any sound at all. The voice that came back was different, deeper, more textured in certain registers, slightly changed in others. She had to relearn her own instrument from the beginning. Muscle memory that had been built over decades had to be rebuilt. Vocal exercises she had mastered as a child had to be approached as if for the first time. She spent 2 full years in intensive vocal rehabilitation from 2018 through 2020. Her 2017 album Now had already launched before the surgery. Her first new material in 15 years, debuting at #1 on the Billboard 200 with 137,000 units sold in its opening week. The songs on it were unmistakably about everything that had happened: the divorce, the grief, the long silence, the slow reconstruction of a self. She wore leopard print on the cover, a callback to her past, but standing in a different posture entirely. The Now tour that followed ran from May through December 2018, 49 shows, over $20 million in revenue. She was performing with a voice that she was still learning to trust, suffering from panic attacks before certain shows, using every coping mechanism she could find, including, she revealed publicly, hypnosis, to stay grounded enough to walk out onto the stage every night. During a Nashville show on that tour, she broke down while speaking to the audience about her divorce. She kept going. She always kept going. In 2020, at 55 years old, Shania contracted COVID-19. Given her existing respiratory vulnerabilities, she had lived with asthma for years. The illness hit her with extraordinary severity. She developed pneumonia. Her lungs filled with fluid on a daily basis. Her antibody levels dropped to near zero. At one point, she flatlined. A specialized medical team had to airlift her for emergency treatment. For 12 days, she received plasma therapy, lying in a hospital, while her body fought something her already compromised system was not equipped to handle easily. She survived. She later said that during her recovery, a conversation with a minister about the simple preciousness of clean air, of breathing without effort, without fear, helped reconnect her to something essential. She began writing music again, not long after. In February 2023, at the age of 57, she released Queen of Me. It was her boldest album yet, not in terms of commercial ambition, but in terms of what it said. 12 tracks about aging without apology, about menopause, about the particular freedom that comes from having been through enough suffering that public opinion stops being frightening. She posed for the album artwork without a shirt, something she said felt, after a lifetime of covering her body in the aftermath of abuse, like an act of profound liberation. The album debuted at #1 in the United Kingdom. In the United States, it sold 38,000 units in its opening week. It reminded people that the conversation Shania Twain is having with her audience has never been simply about entertainment. It has always been about something larger. The Queen of Me tour ran from April 2023 through November 2024, 75 shows across North America and Europe. She performed aerial stunts and staged multiple costume changes and brought energy to those stages that artists half her age would struggle to match. At Coachella in April 2022, she had surprised the crowd during Harry Styles' headlining set, singing "Man, I Feel Like a Woman, and You're Still the One," to an audience that included people who were toddlers when those songs first charted. Multiple generations standing together, singing the same words. That moment captured something true about what her music has become. It isn't nostalgia, it's continuity. Before we close, here's something that almost never appears in the standard telling of her story. In 1999, Britney Spears was recording her second album and working with the most in-demand producers in pop music. One of those producers was Mutt Lange, Shania's husband at the time. Spears recorded vocals for the song Don't Let Me Be the Last to Know at the couple's chateau in Switzerland. Shania was aware of the collaboration and actually co-wrote the song herself. The Queen of Country Pop co-wrote a Britney Spears ballad in her own home with her own husband. It is genuinely one of the more unexpected footnotes in the history of both artists' careers, and it almost never gets mentioned. Here is the thing about Shania Twain's story that most retellings miss. It isn't a story about an artist who overcame hardship on her way to success. It's a story about hardship that never really stopped, that kept arriving in new forms, in new decades, wearing new disguises. Poverty, then violence, then grief, then illness, then betrayal, then depression, then a stolen voice, then a pandemic. These weren't obstacles on the path. They were the path. What she did, consistently and without the fanfare that retrospect gives things, was refuse to treat any one of them as the ending. She sang in bars at 8 years old because her family needed food. She performed night after night at Deerhurst for 5 years because her siblings needed a guardian. She fought her way onto producer credits at a time when that simply wasn't done for women in Nashville. She went back into the studio 15 years after her last album with a voice that didn't work the way it used to. She had surgery while awake. She came back from COVID. She posed for album art that made her feel free for the first time in her body. None of those are small things. Each one of them, taken individually, would be remarkable. Together, they make a portrait of a human being with a particular quality of endurance, not invulnerability, not immunity to pain, but an insistence on continuing despite pain. An inability to accept that any single blow is the final one. There's a road in Timmins, Ontario, named after her now. Shania Twain Way runs through the same city where a small girl sang after midnight for $20 a show so her family could eat. The same city where the winters dropped to 30 below and the house was cold and the future was not visible from where she was standing. She made it visible anyway. That is what her music has always been about. Underneath all the catchy hooks and the rhinestone outfits and the record certifications, it has always been a document of someone deciding to keep going and inviting everyone listening to do the same.
If you enjoyed the video, please help our channel grow and like and subscribe. We hope to see you again soon.